All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we have a return guest, a very interesting guest, in Lieutenant Colonel Buzz Patterson. He is a New York Times best-selling author. He is a former senior military aide to President Bill Clinton. During that time, he was the carrier of the nuclear football. Very interesting story. Very happy to welcome you back, Buzz Patterson, to the Conscience of Kansas radio program.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. Great to be back with you.
Well, you're one of our favorite guests. I tell you, folks really enjoyed the last time we had you on the show. And I was wondering, since we've got so many new listeners, all these new Wildcats coming in, if you could, before we get to this new book, Conduct Unbecoming, that's got us so excited, I wonder if you could tell our folks a little bit about your really interesting military career.
Well, I was an Air Force pilot for 20 years, Paul. Served around the world, essentially, and flew in combat operations in places as varied as Grenada, Rwanda, Somalia, Bosnia was probably my most active flying combat operations. And then in 1996, I was asked to be President Bill Clinton's Air Force aide, senior military aide, and carried what's called a nuclear football for President Clinton for those 2 years, from 1996 to 1998. And the nuclear football is the satchel, the piece of luggage, I guess, that needs to accompany the president no matter where he is in the world, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so that he can be the commander-in-chief and launch military operations up to and including a nuclear attack. So I was the guy that did that for President Clinton for those 2 years.
Wow, unbelievable. That is a job that very few have had, and it's probably very hard for most people to really fathom the responsibility that comes with that. Well, you've written a bunch of very interesting books, and you've got this brand new book called Conduct Unbecoming, How Barack Obama is Destroying the Military and Endangering Our Security. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about this book.
Sure. Well, when I retired from the Air Force, Paul, as you know, I wrote Dereliction of Duty about my time with President Clinton and all the things that I'd seen that really troubled me about the way he went about being our commander-in-chief back in the 1990s. And I really thought that was a clarion call to the country to not go down that path again in terms of electing a man as unqualified as President Bill Clinton. And unfortunately, we've exceeded my expectations, and we've elected President Barack Obama, who in my mind is completely unequipped, unqualified to be our commander-in-chief. So I've written my most recent book, Conduct Unbecoming, about Barack Obama and the fact that all the ways that he is destroying our military and endangering our security, again, as a kind of a clarion call to the nation as we approach the elections in November of this year and November of 2012, to take stock of where we are in this global war with Islamic jihadism. And we've got to change the way we're doing business, especially as it regards the White House and our military.
I agree with you. I think it's very important. I think the American people hold the destiny of this country in their hands. We have to look forward to what kind of country are we going to have. Now, with these book writers, and we have many, many of them on the Conscience of Kansas radio program, you look at these covers and they give you the first impression of the book. In Conduct Unbecoming, I think you encapsulated one of the major concerns with this president. You've got the picture of Barack Obama in one of his many bows he did across the country. Why did you pick that cover?
Well, I think it shows two things. It shows the character of the man we've elected to be our president, the fact that he has a tendency to coddle our enemies and to show the back of his hand to our allies, and he has gone around the world apologizing for America. He believes America to be an unexceptional country, where I think you and I would agree that we are quite exceptional. He feels like he has to apologize for America's transgressions and sins. And I also put that on the cover that picture on the cover because I think it also speaks to the fact that we have a president who's incapable of projecting power, projecting strength, projecting American might and will when we're fighting these Islamic jihadist terrorists around the world. And he has a tendency to bow to people in Iran and North Korea, who I would consider enemies, and then he turns his back on Israel and the United Kingdom, who I would consider friends. And again, I think we've elected a man who sees things, Paul, through a foreign lens. He sees America as a foreigner would see America, and feels the necessity to frequently apologize for who he is and who we are.
It's frustrating to watch that happen, Buzz. It's frustrating for me. It's frustrating for our radio listeners. And, we wonder, where's this guy coming from? And that's probably a very adequate way to put it. I've always wondered, is he simply surrounded by a bunch of liberal yes men that are saying, the American people really love you, Barack. The American people really support what you're doing here. Because I see all this opposition. We see it out of Kansas. We see the marches in Washington. We see on all these different issues. And whether it's the mosque at Ground Zero issue that's going on, whether it is Obamacare, and the list goes on. You can go to Rasmussen's. You can go to all the different polls. They reflected as well. When we look at Barack Obama, he'll get out and do speeches like, everybody's for it. I'm glad everybody's happy with what I'm him doing? This guy seems like he has a very big mental disconnect with the American people.
I think that's perfectly put, Paul. I do a pretty good job in the book, I think, of going back and talking about his childhood and how he was raised. And if you look at the people he's associated himself with throughout his life, not just his childhood, when he was living with his grandparents in Hawaii, his single most important adult mentor was a communist black man named Frank Marshall Davis, who taught Barack to be very suspicious of Americans in America. And then when he came over to the United States mainland to go to college, he surrounded himself with, in his own words, socialists and communists. And then, of course, as he found himself in Chicago, he started buddying up with people like the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, Bill Ayers, and Bernardine Dorn, two former members of the Weather Underground, two domestic American terrorists. So he's really always sided with and found himself more comfortable with people who were anti-American, and certainly had a disdain for the U.S. military. So hopefully this book, Conduct Unbecoming, can be a source document for your listeners. If they want to know who the guy really is and all the ways he's really damaging our security, I included a lot of great appendices in the book as well, so that your listeners will have a source document at their disposal to know exactly the damage that President Barack Obama is inflicting upon our country.
Well, I think that's important that we have it. We always push for education first. People have a lot of passions, and I endorse a lot of the anger that's going on in this country right now that people are feeling. They feel like they're being rejected, that their voice is not being heard, or they just don't care about the American people's voice on a lot of these issues. But we have to have the facts and be educated, so we direct our emotions in a constructive way. I want to ask you a little bit, there's so many issues that I think this book is going to be covering. Talk to us a little bit about your thoughts about the don't ask, don't tell in the military, and what you think the effects of that issue is going to hash out.
Well, it's a very important issue, and I think it's been given really short shrift by the mainstream media. It's a huge issue in terms of the military culture and the folks that I talk to in the military. I've got quite a few friends that are still in, and it seems to me that Barack Obama is trying to do to the U.S. military what he did with the auto industry, our banking system, healthcare. He's seizing these large institutions and trying to radically remake them in his socialist image. The don't ask, don't tell is a perfect example where he's using the U.S. military as a social petri dish. He's already told the military it's going to happen. He didn't allow the military to really study it, and now he's telling them it's going to happen. Let's best tell him how to make it happen. Well, what's going to end up happening when you allow open homosexuality in the military? You're going to have transgendered lesbians and gays serving openly. You're going to drive out a lot of the current talent we have in the military. There's one study I quote in the book where up to 25% of the currently existing U.S. Military personnel will probably leave or will think about leaving the service if don't ask, don't tell is ultimately pushed down their throats. And I think you're going to have morale issues. I think you're going to have sexual harassment issues. You're going to have, for example, in the Marine Corps, Paul, these open bay barracks where we have Marines bunking on cots next to each other. Can you imagine if you put a bunch of heterosexual men and women in that sort of environment, the problems you'd have? Well, the same thing's going to happen when you put a bunch of men, homosexual men, around each other, or lesbian women around each other. You're going to have sexual harassment issues, morale issues. It's going to be abysmal.
It seems like that would be the case, and it also seems that we're going to have this what I call deviant activity going on with this heavy infusion of political correctness. And it seems like to me we've had this political correctness infused a lot in the war in Iraq. The idea of fight but don't fight, and these different how we treat the military, how the military has been treated whenever there's been a question of doubt on any issue, from Haditha soldiers on and on and on. This it just seems like it ties, confuses, frustrates, and really limits the ability of the military to do some of its primary functions.
Well, it most definitely does. And I think it's, as you also alluded to, I think it's symptomatic or symbolic of the politically correct nature in the Pentagon today. I talk about the rules of engagement, Paul, in Afghanistan currently, where we have Marines going on patrols in these very hostile regions of Afghanistan, and they're told not to put bullets into their guns for fear that they might hit innocent civilians.
Oh my goodness!
We have Air Force AC-130 gunships flying at night. Very advanced infrared technology. Even if they can locate and actually target a Taliban stronghold or an Al Qaeda stronghold, they're not allowed to shoot at night for the fear that they might hit innocent civilians. So we're going into this war under President Obama with the hands of our guys and girls tied behind their backs. They really aren't allowed to conduct combat with the current rules of engagement as they should be allowed. Number one, and I think it's very indicative of the politically correct nature of the Pentagon. Number two, that we have so many social engineering policies that are much more important to Obama than actually fighting and killing the enemy that wants to kill America.